So welcome back. Let's wait for Michael. You can stay there if you want. So this is an open panel. I don't know if you have questions. One thing that I have the first question, I will break the ice. I think that as an introduction to effect, there are some people here that never used it. I think that you never mentioned all the ecosystem. Yeah, we talked a bit about Schema, of course. I mainly do front end as a job. I think that you can imagine. And the things that I use most in Effect, like every day, is stuff like option, match, Schema, of course, a lot for forms reason, of course. And so what I think that Michael maybe can answer the question. How do you suggest for people that want to start with little pieces without refactoring, maybe all the APIs with generators, etc., to start with Effect?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think you should think in like for the Effect ecosystem, you should think of it like you think of TypeScript plus the NPM ecosystem. So there's no need to know for the full scope of NPM packages to adopt TypeScript. You start bits by bits and you add things as you discover the need. I think it sort of depends by the scope of the integration. Usually in front end, you start, as you mentioned, with a few modules that are there in the Effect core, namely options, very useful, either, which will be named the result in V4. It's very useful to model error as values, even if you don't rewrite the full application with Effect. Schema is almost always one of the entry points because data validation is essential, both in backend and in frontend. And integrating Schema, you can use it just like you use Zod, so that there's no need to rewrite the whole system in Effect to leverage Schema. Now, usually when you start integrating Effect, you do first refactor, which can be on the leaves of your application without starting from the top. Then Effect usually spreads out, and you get to a point where you sort of feel the need to do a little bit more. For example, usually when you start to deal with more errors of values, so you have a parent control flow on things that were hidden before, you start realizing the amount of things that can go wrong in your code. And the natural evolution is telemetry. Because if you don't, like, especially in production, where if you run everything locally, you have an error, you cannot console logs. It's very easy. You can use a step debugger. You can figure out what goes on. But when you're in production, you don't have the ability to just add a console log on running code. You don't just have the ability to patch in a debugger on production code, especially knowing after the fact. You usually know about an error when it already happened, not up front. And you resort to logs if they're there. They're usually not there, because if something goes wrong, you didn't predict it. And after a while, you feel the need for OpenTelemetry. And that's usually when you start to integrate Effect as a primitive versus just using either or result. And from there, you then ask yourself, okay, how do I integrate Effect with whatever you're working on? And before, we've seen the talk from Mattia Crovero in integrating Effect in Next.js, the similar patterns to integrate Effect in plain React code. For example, now we have Effect Atom, and well, depending if you integrate with databases, you might want to use our Drizzle integration, or you might want to use the Effect SQL packages. So it sort of depends on progressive needs. I think we disadvise one-off rewrites of everything, because it's a bit unrealistic to think a software that has been in production for a while, you can just flip the switch and rewrite everything in Effect in one day. it's usually non-realistic. Of course, if you're just playing and if your code base is in the hundreds or if in the thousands of lines of code, that might be an option for you. Usually code bases starts with like 10,000, 100,000, if not more lines of code. You're not going to rewrite 100,000 lines of code in a day. So you usually start very incremental and find yourself to the point where adopting it for the full thing becomes natural.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to add something. Okay. There are questions from you. Okay. One from, I know the guy, I don't remember the name.
There you go. I have a question for Mattia number 2. I forgot the...
It's okay, you can later.
So you mentioned me before that you introduced effect in your application, in your company. And I wanted to ask you, how was the experience in scaling, the adoption by other engineers? So do you think that there are limitations based on their seniority, stuff like that? Does it scale also for, if you have a junior that is remote rather than in office, so stuff like that? Thank you.
Excellent question.
Okay, thank you for the question. And well, yes, seniority can help, but I think that effect has also another effect that is making you a better engineer. So it is not only learning from other senior developers, but a junior is learning from the great implementations that are behind effect. So yes, it is not easy. You have to start incrementally or introduce someone slowly to a new repository written in effect, but it is possible, and it only has benefits in the long run.
And what about offline versus remote coworkers? Do you think that there are differences in onboarding people on effect? If they are remotely, maybe it's more difficult.
Okay, yeah. We don't have much experience on the remote part. I think that, no, it should be okay too, but maybe having a space where you share ideas about effect and not only effect can be beneficial to learn it.
Other questions?
The effect schema library, the effect schema library, we've got any benchmarks on it versus SOLV4 and archetype? Because I know archetype is pretty awesome in terms of its performance. It'd be nice to see what the schema library is like.
But we start with the. Are you talking about zone 3 or version 4? There's a difference because if I recall correctly, V4 of zone is using G, like using a new function, so they build the code or optimized code for that particular schema, but they run through a compilation step. And schema V3 and also V4 for now don't do that. So there is a sensible difference in terms of performance. We are thinking of applying the same approach, but there are some issues with some runtimes that don't allow this kind of optimization. So it's kind of unfair to compare the performance of a non-G optimized version, but if we take the the version not optimized in that form, performance are slightly better in the case of bad inputs, and slightly worse in the case of good inputs. So there's no great difference in performance between the two libraries if we exclude the optimization step that Colin has introduced in before.
And what about archetype? Archetype.
Archetype. If I recall correctly, archetype 2 uses the same trick. So it compiles to optimize code using new function.
Thank you.
And sorry, just to add a little bit on the point, the trick of just-in-time completion has drawbacks because it's going to be slightly slower to create the schemas when they generate basically the equivalent of an eval, and that code becomes faster because it's just-in-time optimized and it becomes monomorphic. So usually that gives you a huge boost on good values. But in reality, when you bring those optimizations to production, there's a risk of the just-in-time compiler de-optimizing those after. So it's very hard to get a reliable number on JIT optimized code. Plus, we've seen that in real use cases, like anytime you have any asynchronicity going on, like usually when you decode a value, that value comes from an HTTP request, from a file system read, and so on and so forth. The benefit that you get is almost non-relevant to the overall performance of the program. So we are evaluating if to add those things in V4. There's nothing that technically blocks it, but it increases code complexity, it increases bundle size, and if it's not strictly necessary, I think we should be careful into just optimizing for the sake of having something faster. For example, even the effect runtimes itself could be way faster if you remove all the telemetry, but the telemetry is a big feature that is very important for production usage. So the trade-off is already finding the right balance between performance versus function versus, in this case, bundle size and the ability to execute in every runtime, which is a non-trivial task that Giulio has been fighting on for a while.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question about that topic because you know that I love schema. All of these basically is meaningless in front-end, in front-end world, schema like Zod and the others, they support standard schema. And when you compile all of that in standard schema, basically it doesn't matter, right?
Well, it does, because fundamentally what standard schema does is it's simply an interface that models a validate function. And the performance elements come from how that validate function is implemented. So behind the scenes, if you use a faster validator, you're going to have a faster outcome with standard schema. And by having had some chats with Colin, I already know that they want to extend standard schema to more features. They want to add encoding. It won't come in the same standard schema. It will probably be a second specification for backward compatibility. But we had a very good chat a few weeks ago with Colin, and ideally the goal is to get to a point where those libraries are as interchangeable as possible, which means if you're using effect schema for something and you realize you're having a huge performance trouble for that. There are some use cases, for example, when in front end you do local first development, where your storage is your local file system and everything is synchronous versus asynchronous. At that point, those milliseconds might count. And if you are in that situation, you might be able to use something that has just-in-time compilation. And especially if you are like if your database is your local disk, the risk of an invalid value is not too much. You are saving the values, you are reading back what you saved before. So you're just preventing corruption of data that if the data is corrupted, the application should crash. So for those use cases, performance matter way more than decoding over an HTTP request. And I feel like it's one of those things where it's better to have two solutions that focus on each of the problem better versus one that has non-beneficial trade-offs overall.
Thank you, Gabe. Other questions?
Can I ask? I'm trying to push effect on the company where I work on, and right now it's like few repository on the backend side. I just need for the value proposition, to sell effect in the company. At the moment, of course, AI and LLM are very, they are pushing a lot. So I don't know if you guys have some insight regarding how friendly effect as a, it's regarding LLM and code impersonation. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm taking this one probably next. I'll switch to Mattia because maybe he has some ideas too. I've been investigating the topic deeply over the past 6 months. I was very late to the AI game in coding. I was basically not using AI at all up until Sonnet 4. And at that point, I've realized there was a huge difference. The models before were not performing well. After Sonnet 4, you can actually leverage AI much more. And with effect, I think you're gonna have very different results based on if you're capable of using AI or not. And I think with AI, like the most important element is context engineering it properly. And when the AI has enough context on effect, it performs incredibly well. Like I almost think like it effect could be what solves the AI's lock crisis in a sense, because AI has been trained on human language mostly. If you ask a human question to an AI, you're most likely gonna get a response. When the AI has to deal with low-level code, it doesn't perform so well. It hallucinates mistakes that were not there, it ends up deleting tests, it ends up doing any sort of weird stuff. But for an AI system, if you have a computation and you tell the AI, hey, I want to manage a specific error in this case, and if this error happens, I want to do something else. With effect, you get a lot of typed feedback, and that typed feedback helps the AI substantially in performing better. So I think if you manage it correctly, and we have some advice on how to do that, the quality of code becomes exceptional, and you can actually rely and lean on the AI much more than you would without effect. And the advice is on how to manage that with effect. First, you should have very good either agents.md or Claude.md, depending on the system you use, to explain the structure of your repository or your ways of doing things, which might be different from anybody else's. So what's very specific? Then I found it extremely useful to add the effect repository as a Git subtree for example, in a directory called whatever context/effect. And you can do the same with other libraries. Models are exceptionally good at searching in code. So people think when you add a context directory, the AI has to consume everything. That's untrue. You're just providing the AI access to some sort of database of knowledge that it can reference when it needs. And this makes the feedback loop for AI much more effective, because then it has an error and it searches, okay, how is the same pattern managed within the effect code base? It figures it out and it spits out an answer which is almost perfect. Plus, it becomes much easier as a learning exercise. Like if there are some functions in effect, you have no idea what they do, or if you're looking for how would I do this with effect, you can just ask the question and the AI is going to search the effect repository, which has local access to, and it's going to be able to answer the questions in an exceptionally good way. So I think AI for us is a big win in the adoption curve. And I think like 80% of the ramp up in downloads that we had during last year is primarily due to AI coding. So I think the value proposition on selling it to your team, purely on the coding side, AI is a big plus. And on the non-strictly coding related elements, I think things like telemetry, proper error handling, and so on and so forth have huge business value. Because we like to deploy very fast. To deploy very fast, you need good tests. You need good debuggability of the output. If you don't have either of those, you're going to pay a price in deployment speed. And I think that's the two elements that are most valuable for business adoption.
Thank you. Also, I think that you have the LLMs TXT also, yeah. For I used Effect with basically GitHub, Cursor, and Claude. So in my, it really, and the result, even with the same model, is slightly different because, for example, Cursor can read your errors directly from the VS Code context, and this is, when you have every kind of error already typed, could be very helpful. And you can also add the LLM TXT to improve the kind of the answers. Of course, it a lot depends on the model and how much context you can leverage there. So yeah, from Sonnet 4 that they have a huge step forward, of course, with the LLM TXT and with the, it's really better. The other thing that I think, now that I switched basically only on Claude, because I already also removed Netflix from my, so I also decided to remove Cursor because I stopped to use the autocomplete. With Claude, for example, one good thing is that when you have everything basically handled with effect, it will become very good, to wrote for you a lot of stuff. Like, when you have to recreate for the 20 times the same API with the boilerplate code that you of course will have, it's beautiful. And this is of course true for every kind of stuff, but the good thing is that most of the time having the error, the typed error will help you a lot, because you will see, and you can go to, even with Claude, you can copy paste your, TypeScript error and say, there is this error. Oh yeah, of course. Another thing that I do.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And another thing that can help a lot, having this kind of type system, I do that a lot of time, is basically to pass somewhere the DTS for the stuff that you are doing. So yeah, for example, you are using I don't know, some kind of data type, and you have an error, you can go there, open the DTS, copy paste the DTS, and they will say, oh yeah, now I see. and that's slightly, and it's, yeah, and again, you are absolutely right. Oh yeah, thank you for.
Let me remove the test.
Yeah, the only issue that now I have is of course of test, because not yesterday, no, it was okay. Some days ago he wrote me. I asked, "Can you write the test?" Yeah, I wrote the structure. Now you can finish yourself. But I think that's.
Yeah, I just have one thing to add to that. There are two things we have that I didn't mention. I did that on purpose. And that's one is the LLM.txt. The second one is the effect MCP, which is a way of dynamically searching the docs with MCP access. I think both have slight drawbacks. The issue with the LLM.txt is that the LLM.txt is always prepended to the context of whatever you do. So it ends up consuming a lot of context, and it ends up adding to the context a lot of non-relevant information. And I think LLM.txt in general was an attempt that the broader community has done to improve the output of AI coding systems. But personally, I don't like it, and I don't think it's gonna have an impact in the long run. I think everybody will end up deleting the LLM.txt. The MCP server does have some advantages in the fact that you don't have to clone the repository locally and so on and so forth. But still, it implies that the AI is good at searching through your custom MCP server. And many times we add MCP servers to an LLM just to have the LLM ignore the fact that those MCP servers are even there. And I think in that we're going to see with models in the future, if they become better and better at using tools that come from MCP servers, or if they remain as good as they are today. I think of either of those solutions, the quality of the output that I get if I just add the effect repository as a subtree is night and day. So it's kind of an open question. We don't have a precise answer. This is how you do it. This is how you get the best output. But we have some observations that we've evolved during the last 6 months. But we are actively researching, and the idea is to then publish the findings into our website, developing a stronger guideline on how to use AI with effect.
You covered everything.
So we have time for one last question. Okay.
Right, as the last question. What is the future of Effect? What are you planning to push? What are you working on as a future development?
Go on, take this one.
I mean, well, I can tell you what's good. Oops. Okay, I dropped my mic. The other one. Okay.
You also dropped, sure.
I don't know where.
Okay. Did you find it?
No. Oh, makes sense. Yeah, makes sense.
Just wait a second. You and microphones is a
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know why, but Microsoft always hate me. So there are some things that are coming for effect, namely like there is V4 that will come, and V4 will be like a great improvement for effect in terms of tree shakeability, bundle size, and there are a lot of findings out there about what effect V4 will allow you. And there is also like a talk by Mike that did this effect days this year about that. And this is definitely one of the things that will come from effect. There are also other things that will come. I can say something that, for example, I work mostly on DevTools, but there are more things coming about that. And also, like project-wise, there are some things that I cannot maybe share, but yeah.
Shut up.
No, I shouldn't share, yeah.
Nobody's listening to you.
No, nobody's listening to me. But yeah, there was like those big push about that. Also, like there are a lot of libraries like now in effect, like Effect Cluster, that right now are in a phase that we are pushing basically through stability for that. And that will basically allow you to build workflow and like clustered system with Effect, which is like a match made in heaven. And so, yeah, regarding what's coming, like there are a lot of things coming, but yeah, I don't know if I missed something.
No, I think you mentioned the key points.
Yeah.
In general, Effect will move higher up in the stack, in the sense that Effect started as a general purpose programming primitive, almost like a better promise, and it's progressively eating up the stack. Projects like Effect Cluster, projects like Effect AI, Effect Workflows, and so on and so forth are all one layer above, are closer to the user business domain, and we are investing a lot of time because like there's some deep feeling I have, and I had it before AI was a thing. Effect is born in the fintech space where transactions are very, very important. And I always wanted to have something like Effect Cluster that can do reliable transactions across independent systems. Of course, with the caveat of idempotency, because every distributed system, anytime you have network, you cannot consider the network reliable. So your service-to-service integration should be retriable, and that implies idempotency of actions. And with Effect Cluster, you get a very good runtime to handle those. Effect Cluster is based on ideas from the 80s. The ideas behind Effect Cluster are the ideas of Erlang on the OTP, Open Telecom Protocol system, where basically you have a distributed actor model where actors are independent entities that share messages with other entities. And that's an extremely powerful distributed system primitive. Now, the world has since moved on to more traditional workflows, such as the ones you will have in temporal, restate, and so on and so forth. But I think with AI agents especially, like before, workflows were very deterministic, were almost sequences of operations that all have to happen one after the other. And they were almost always one input, one output. Now with AI agents, we are in an era where the average response time, I was chatting the other day with our friends at Open Router that also uses Effect, they were telling me that their average response time is longer than 30 seconds because AIs are slow. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in 30 seconds. Plus, you have steerable agents. You might want to send messages to agents while they are producing outputs. Might want to receive those messages. You have agent-to-agent communication. All of that looks very good if you think about it in terms of independent entities that share messages between each other. And you also consider yourself as the human, as an independent entity that communicates to the external world by sharing messages. If we look at this room, what are we? We are a distributed set of entities that share knowledge by sending messages to each other. I'm now speaking on a microphone to you. I'm broadcasting a message to each one of you. So these kind of patterns will be native in Effect, and that's where we're going with the open source frameworks.
Okay, thank you. And thank to all of you to be here, and see you, I don't know, when is the next Effect meetup?
Aren't you the organizer?
No, I'm not. No, I see there is one in Munich, like in.
Yeah, we are in Munich next week.
So
it's not an effect meetup. We just do a talk there, but we have effect meetups in Berlin, in Hamburg, and New York, big one that we're launching in November, and we have one meetup groups in San Francisco, and of course Effect Days, which is yet unannounced, but there's going to be a conference next year too. We're not dropping the ball on that. We just want to be sure we find the right place. Can maybe spoil it's going to be a sunny location on the seaside of something. And yeah, so hopefully see you soon.
So no effect days in Milan. Sorry.
Come on, isn't it sunny and close to a seaside?
Yeah, if you consider.
No, it's not going to be in Milan.
Yeah, service so are good. Sometimes it's like a sea. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all, and see you next time.